I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare in-the-trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm sitting here with Jose Rivera, who wrote the screenplay for Walter Salles' film The Motorcycle Diaries, which earned him an Oscar nomination. He's recently written the upcoming drama Welcome to America and is working on the Beat Generation classic On the Road. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Mike.
So now you've worked in a variety of formats, everything from poetry to copywriting to television to playwriting to screenplays. Do you find that one format can inform the other? Have you taken different kind of inspirations from each one?
Yeah, I mean, I started off in theater as just something I fell in love with at a young age and didn't really know what I was doing, didn't know that there was a career called playwriting. Mm-hmm. You know, I kept at it long enough to have my work produced and become successful. You know, I've always felt that when it comes to writing, certain stories demand to be told through language and certain stories demand to be told through images. And I found that some stories that I was thinking of and constructing in my mind were better for film than they were for theater. But then there were other stories that had ideas and, you know, poetic images and whatever that needed to be done in the theater.
Now, you studied theater at Denison University?
Yeah, I studied theater. I wrote 4 plays that I produced and directed myself at school. And there were no playwriting classes or anything. I never actually took a playwriting class. Oh,
that's interesting. What was the kind of context in which your own plays got mounted?
Well, I just wanted to do them.
Good for you.
You know, I didn't get much support from the theater because they had their own problems. So I just sort of got some friends together. We put together some money. We bought our own sets and lights, and then we just put them up.
How did your first feature script come about?
The first feature came about. I had gotten to a point in my career where I was writing plays and they were being produced, and I still wasn't making a living, so I did some television. I worked on a TV series called Eerie, Indiana, which was on NBC, I think, yeah, NBC, for 1 season. And I was at a kind of crossroads where I thought, you know, I love the theater, I can make money in TV, but I felt if you were really going to be successful at one of those, it would exclude the other. And I needed a way to make a living that allowed me the freedom that I enjoyed writing plays. So I wrote my first spec screenplay at that time. It was 1992.
And how did that turn out? Did that get set up or bought? No?
I think I learned my craft on that one.
On that one? That was the one that you learned on?
Yeah.
Do you ever think about revisiting it? Or,
sometimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, you know, it's about a poor guy from the Bronx, a Puerto Rican guy from the Bronx who falls in love with this upper-class girl from Westchester County, and, you know, kind of Romeo and Juliet in the Bronx kind of thing. And I think probably has potential. I'm sure someone will do it.
But the experience of writing that first one kind of gave you the sea legs to do the next one and the next one?
Yeah. I really, you know, the theater for me has always been something that came quite naturally. Mm-hmm. You know, I have a good ear and a good sense of what the stage is for and how you make it work. That I never had to learn it, but I did have to learn the craft of screenwriting. I find the craft of screenwriting to be like writing or like, I don't know, making cabinets or something. I mean, I really had to learn how to nail the nails and do that kind of stuff. When
you say craft, do you mean kind of the 3-act structure and the mechanics of essential storytelling? That
and the sense that the camera, which doesn't exist in theater, because the audience is the camera, mm-hmm. But that the camera is a specific living creature that helps you tell your story. And how do you tame it? You know, how do you use that object to tell a story in which you're not going to use as many words. You're not going to use language to tell your story. You're not going to have a character say, this is how I feel. Mm-hmm. How are you going to have your camera do that? And that took me a while to learn. I have to say, it took a lot of work.
Did you write many screenplays before the first one got produced?
Well, yeah. I mean, the first one was Motorcycle Diaries.
The first one that got produced?
Yes, it was Motorcycle Diaries. And that was...
Were there many before that one?
Screenplays were probably 7 or 8 screenplays. Okay. One was on spec, the first one, Heart's Desire, was on spec, and then the others were screenplays that I either pitched and sold and wrote or were assignments.
Which one, although I can probably guess, but which one do you think has had the most impact on your career so far?
Well, probably the second screenplay I wrote called Lucky.
I'll say I guessed wrong. I guessed the nominated one.
No. Lucky really changed. You know, up until I wrote Lucky, I had, you know, just that one spec screenplay, and, you know, like anyone else in town, bumming around trying to get a job, and not much to show for my effort. And then I sold this screenplay on a pitch. Basically, it's about a man who's born old and gets younger. And I sold it to Interscope. And that really changed everything, because suddenly I had a job. And then when I finished the screenplay, I had, even though the screenplay was never made, a pretty good sample. In fact, that was the screenplay that Walter read before he hired me to write Motorcycle.
Oh, so that was the screenplay that got you to Walter Salles?
Yep.
What's been the most consistently challenging part of your writing process? Is it dialogue? Is it story? Is it structure? Like, what do you find the most challenging when you write a screenplay?
Probably, I would say story. Dialogue comes pretty natural to me. Story is much harder, you know, because of my training in the theater. Theater plays aren't so dependent on stories, you know, and a lot of American playwrights sort of worship at the feet of Anton Chekhov, who for 3.5 hours will have the minimal story, you know. And so a lot of plays are really events or an incident around a particular moment. But you can't write a film that way. You know, it needs to move. It needs to have something going. So that to me has been the hardest. And I've been very impressed with people who can just spin them out. You know, for instance, and we'll probably get to this later, when I worked with Roland Emmerich on Welcome to America, the man can sit down and spin stories like there's no tomorrow. And maybe I'll learn it, I don't know.
What are your organizational methods? Do you outline before you write a screenplay, or do you have, do you use cards, or just kind of like, do you wing it?
No, I don't. I wing it in the theater, but in film I don't, just because the structure is so important. I don't do cards, but I have fairly detailed outlines that I work from.
And once the outline is completed, does it take you a long time to complete the screenplay?
I'm both a fast and slow writer, meaning I won't write until I've done enormous amounts of research, until I've really thought about it for a long time, and then I write very quickly. So, for instance, in the Motorcycle Diaries experience, you know, I researched that and lived in the mind of that story for about 9 months before I wrote anything. And then when I wrote it in 3 weeks. But those 3 weeks were backed up by 9 months of constant thinking.
And do you have any rules for yourself in particular governing dialogue or story structure, or, you know, in terms of what you feel needs to be in a screenplay?
Yeah, I would say for dialogue, I guess my only rule is really precision and density, to make things, as you know, every line have as many layers as possible. And that you know, because of my theater training, I went into screenwriting with a real chip on my shoulder, like, oh, screenwriting, it's so easy. And I intentionally wrote shitty dialogue, you know, in my screenplays, because I didn't respect it. And it wasn't until I invested the same amount of attention and detail to my screenwriting dialogue that I did for my theater that I really became a good screenwriter.
Aside from the 9 months researching Motorcycle Diaries, which I imagine isn't, you know, going to happen on every project, once you get through the outlining process, what goes into the nuts and bolts making of a scene for you?
It's a good question. I think the most, I guess I have to ask myself several questions, like, what is the work of the scene? You know, what is it doing in terms of either furthering, you know, our character's development or the story's development or the themes of the thing? Sometimes a scene has a particular prop, say, or a color or a location, and you know, I always seek to sort of create as much variety in a screenplay as possible. So if the previous scene was set in front of a waterfall, the next scene is going to be in a quiet little cafe somewhere. You know, I'm very aware, in a lot of ways, when you're writing a scene for a screenplay, you have to be aware of the macro and the micro at the same time. You have to be aware of the absolute minutest details of what's going on in that moment, at the same time that you're aware of where does this fit into the entire structure and the entire energy of the piece.